When you hear the word desegregation, what do you think of? Brown versus Board of Education? Do you think of black students getting screamed at when walking into white schools? Let's dig a little bit deeper into this very important issue by looking into 5 important points about the history and impact of desegregation in America's public schools. Hi, my name is Jarrett, and welcome to The 5, where we share 5 interesting things in black culture and society in every episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you can get notified when we release new videos. Number 1. Brown versus Board of Education. Linda Brown was only 9 years old when her father, Oliver Brown, attempted to enroll her at Sumner Elementary School in Topeka, Kansas. The school blocked her enrollment. Why? Because Sumner Elementary School was an all-white school back in 1951. Mr. Brown was not having it. He sued the Topeka Board of Education, thus Brown versus Board of Education was born. In May 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that separate education facilities are inherently unequal. Thurgood Marshall argued the case before the Supreme Court. The ruling overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, the ruling that births separate but equal. In 1955 and for decades to come, desegregation of schools became the law of the land, although it still has not been fully achieved. Number 2. New York versus West Virginia. According to a recent study by eBuild, roughly 9 million children, nearly 1 in 5 public school students in the U.S., attend schools that are racially isolated and receive far less money than schools just a few miles away. And if you think segregation is only a problem in the South, you would be wrong. Analysis done in 2011 by the Civil Rights Project at University of California, Los Angeles showed that more than half of black students in the Northeast attended schools with student populations that were 90 to 100% black. The worst offending place was New York, and surprisingly, West Virginia has the most integrated schools. Even cities that are considered diverse are seeing segregation in their public schools. Charlotte, North Carolina is a prime example. The city is 45% white, 35% black, and 13% Latino. It was a model of desegregation in the 1970s. But in recent years, it has seen segregation come back in style. Number 3. The impact of desegregation. Research has shown again and again that desegregation is one of the best ways to bring up the performance of students of color. This is not simply because black kids do better when they're around white kids. It's because they have more access to better resources when they get to go to schools with majority white students. The same research done by UCLA showed that the racial achievement gap in K-12 closed more quickly during the peak years of desegregation in the 1970s and 80s. The gap has widened again in the decades since. Data released by U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights back in 2014 shows that there's an education gap between majority white schools and minority majority schools. For instance, a third of high schools with the highest percentage of black and Latino students do not offer Algebra 2, and a third of these schools do not offer chemistry. Number 4. Data from desegregation. The following findings came out of a long-run impact of school desegregation and school quality on adult attainment by Rucker Johnson. For black men, 5 years spent in desegregated schools yielded an estimated of 25% increase in annual earnings. Desegregation resulted in significant long-run improvements in black adults' health. Each year spent in desegregated schools improved the probability of graduating high school by between 1.3 to 2.9%. That's each year spent, so imagine the impact it would have for all 4 years of high school for hundreds and thousands of black students as a whole. For black men, spending time in desegregated schools as a child reduced the probability of spending time in jail by age 30 by 14.7%. And then number 5, school funding and segregation. Public schools are funded through property taxes. That means areas that produce high property taxes will have more money to fund their local schools. And since school districts limit where a student can attend school, it means students that live in areas with low property value will go to schools that are underfunded compared to their richer areas. Combine that with redlining, a practice that kept blacks from buying homes in specific areas around the country, and you will have a perfect machine to keep schools segregated. This was demonstrated perfectly in Milligan versus Brady, another monumental Supreme Court case. Milligan versus Brady is a much less known case, but a very impactful one for the way schools remain segregated today. This case posed an essential question in 1974. Who should be responsible for desegregating America's schools? In 1970, 2/3 of Detroit's students were black, while growing suburbs were almost exclusively white. In Milliken versus Bradley, the plaintiffs argued that school policies reinforced racist housing practices that had trapped black families inside the city. When a judge ordered black students to be bused to suburban schools, suburb parents fought the ruling all the way to the Supreme Court. The suburbs argued that school district lines had been drawn without malice and that the federal courts had no right to interfere in the local control of schools unless the black parents who brought the case could show that suburbs were responsible for school segregation in Detroit. Which means school districts were not drawn to cause segregation in schools. Therefore, they cannot be forced to desegregate. The Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of the suburbs. Justice Thurgood Marshall, who argued Brown versus Board of Education 2 decades earlier and was one of the judges at the Supreme Court in 1974, expressed his disappointment by saying, "Our nation, I fear, will be ill-served by the court's refusal to remedy separate and unequal education. For unless our children begin to learn together, there is little hope that our people will ever learn to live together and understand each other." Milliken established the sacredness of school district lines and severely limited federal courts' ability to change the status quo. Today, Detroit is even more segregated than it was back in 1974, and Detroit is not the only city. And that's it for this episode. Join us next time as we explore another topic in Black culture and society.